Welcome back to Popcorn Recap. Today we will cover the second half of Waco. You don't need to watch the first one to understand this part, but links to that in description and comments below. To recap the first part, David Koresh is a cult leader who has multiple wives, even as young as 12 years old. The ATF started shooting at them and the Davidians shot back. And now the FBI are involved. They are at a stalemate. And David Koresh refuses to leave his compound. Both sides have had casualties. In episode 4, FBI agent Gary and Mitch argue about how to get David to come out. Gary wants to be tactical by getting David's followers to trickle out, while Mitch and another FBI agent wants to use force. Meanwhile, David tells his followers that God has instructed him stay in the compound. He lets his followers the free will to leave if they want, but makes them feel guilty if they go. He tells them that this is a test from God himself. Suddenly, he collapses because he lost a lot of blood from his bullet wound. Later, Thibodeau buries the bodies underground. Michelle goes to him to complain about her dad being buried like garbage. Her father had always wanted to be buried outside by a tree. Then, a tank readies itself in front of the compound. Steve calls Gary to complain about this. He tells Gary that they are not going to come out because David is the Messiah and God works through him. He also reiterates that the people feel safer inside the compound than outside with all the weapons. Afterwards, Gary finds out Steve's history. Steve is basically the glue that holds the compound together. The cult doubled after Steve joined. Gary thinks Steve might be the key to getting people out. Steve actually wants a few people to leave the compound since their water and food supplies are low. And some of the older folks won't be able to handle this much longer. He goes to his wife to tell her to leave the compound as well. However, Judy refuses to go anywhere without David. She'd rather cut her finger off so she doesn't get an infection. Thanks to Steve and Gary, 4 people leave the compound safely. One day, ball-ender Thibodeau tries to tell Gary that she wants to talk to her son. However, they are not allowing any of that. Meanwhile, David isn't doing too well. Gary calls Steve and tries to persuade him that David is crazy. Gary reminds Steve that David slept with Steve's wife. Crazy modern messiahs always somehow get messages from God that tell them to sleep with multiple women. Steve isn't budging on Gary's tactics though. Later at night, Judy goes to Rachel to ask for some milk for her baby. Due to the stress, the mothers on the compound have stopped lactating, so there's a milk shortage. Steve asks Gary if they could get some milk. However, the lead FBI agent Tony hesitates. Gary tells Steve they'll give them some milk if they let some children out. David overhears this conversation and stops the exchange from happening. Steve is not happy about this. It's day 6 of the stalemate, and the women are diluting powdered milk with water. Food rations are much stricter now. Suddenly, the FBI agents get spooked when they hear about Thibodeau being outside the compound. Steve tells the FBI that Thibodeau is unarmed and just wants to bury a dead body. Gary rushes to tell Mitch that he's unarmed. However, Mitch is uneasy and his sniper is awaiting for permission to shoot Thibodeau. Mitch orders the sniper to stand down and Thibodeau successfully buries Michael's dad. During a press conference, an FBI agent says the cult is using their children as pawns by not allowing them to bring milk to babies. Steve is not happy with Gary painting them in a terrible light. Eventually, David agrees to exchange milk for children. Gary plans on bugging the milk so they can hear what's going on in the compound. The group gathers a bunch of people to exchange for milk. One of them is Steve's wife, Judy, and her child. David doesn't agree to Judy going, so Steve gets upset with David. David reminds him that Judy's child isn't Steve's, it's David's. When the trade is successfully made, Garrett tries to tell Steve that he has the power to end this. Gary uses Judy and her baby to spark anger in Steve, reminding Steve that David had slept with Steve's wife. However, Steve doesn't budge. He says the FBI should be the one to leave because the people in the compound weren't bothering anyone. It was the ATF that provoked all of this to begin with. Gary realizes this stalemate is going to take a long time to sort. Later, David and one of his wives, Rachel, talk to a camera to send out a message. Mitch doesn't think there's a way to reason with David. Meanwhile, the other FBI agent doesn't want the VHS tape to get out because it makes David look too normal. With the bugged milk, Mitch listens in on the conversations David has. Mitch thinks this stalemate is not going anywhere, so they need to use force. While the cult watches TV, Ball Ender sends a message to her son to come out through a newscaster. Gets cut short when Mitch cuts their power lines though. It's day 9 of the stalemate, and the cult still hasn't come out. Gary complains to Tony about how their methods of trying to get the cult to come out is very conflicting. Gary thinks they need to turn the power back on. However, Tony agrees with Mitch because he doesn't want this stalemate to last forever. Meanwhile, Michelle tells Thibodeau that she doesn't have a good relationship with her own mom like Thibodeau does. Michael's mom had left the cult when Michelle was forced to marry David at just 12 years old. Michelle says being married to David feels like you're married to the most special person in the world, but not feeling special yourself. Thibodeau says Michelle is special to him, and Michelle shares the same sentiments. After they get power again, David is upset that the media has painted them as child abusers. Later, Michael's daughter, Serenity, wonders if Thibodeau is going to leave the compound after his message from his mother. Thibodeau doesn't want to leave Michelle and Serenity behind. Gary comes up with a plan to film the children that were released earlier and send the tapes to the parents in order to convince them to come out. The parents watch intently. One parent in particular, Kathy, gets really upset when she realizes not all of her kids are together. Kathy calls the FBI, but she finds out that the father of one of her kids took them and got custody. They successfully convince her to come out, but David isn't happy with her decision. It's day 12 of the stalemate. David gets upset with Kathy. Then he tells another follower to leave because he took more rations than others. Kathy and the man successfully leave the compound. David is lost as he doesn't know what God wants him to do. God hasn't talked to him in days. Judy assures him to keep waiting for God's sign. It's day 17 and a large tank is driving around the compound to destroy their buildings and cars. David is upset with Gary, but Gary did not order anyone to destroy their property. Then, Gary gets upset with Tony and Mitch for destroying the property. They are getting really impatient because Tony has politicians breathing down his neck. Tony then calls David and threatens him to leave the compound tomorrow morning, otherwise action will be taken. It's day 18 and the group weigh their options about leaving or staying. David interrupts their discussion and guilts them. Rachel is upset with David because everyone's been suffering. However, David tells them that a miracle is coming and they are going to miss out on it. Then, Gary finds out that Tony is going to use psychological pressure to get the cult to come out. Gary doesn't agree with this because these people are already crazy, and adding psychological pressure is only going to make things worse. At night, Thibodeau celebrates Serenity's birthday by giving her cake and a present. However, the psychological warfare interrupts them. The FBI agents blind their compound with bright lights and annoying sounds and sirens. It's day 20 and ball ender Thibodeau throws a tantrum during Tony's press conference. She just wants to talk to her son, but they are not allowing her. Subsequently, Thibodeau and Michelle have grown really close to each other. They both have feelings of real love. Thibodeau goes to David and tells him he doesn't want to die in the compound. David tries to persuade him that they are going to the kingdom of heaven soon. Thibodeau wonders if David will allow Michelle and Serenity to leave the compound with him. However, David says that they are his property to protect, not Thibodeau's. So, Thibodeau decides to send his mom a video message saying there are people in the compound that he can't leave behind. He hopes to see his mom soon though. At night, the group get annoyed of the sounds and sirens. The young children cover their ears, while Judy looks like she's losing her mind. It's day 25, and not a single person has come out since the psychological warfare began. Gary tells Mitch to tone it down. Mitch thinks it will make them look weak if they back down now, so he doesn't. At night, the sounds and sirens continue. Steve finds a cell phone to call his sister. He wants her to know that they'd never kill themselves. So if they somehow wind up dead, the FBI did it. Wayne gets a generator powered up, so the group uses it to play music through the loudspeakers. This pisses Tony and Mitch off. Day 40 and the psychological warfare continues. Most of the people in the compound are staying inside a cellar to avoid the bright lights and noise. Gary has been trying to get a hold of David, but they are not answering their calls. A radio show host, Ron, goes over David's theory of the 7 seals. The 5th seal has been opened since the ATF attacked David and his compound. The people inside feel at ease knowing that at least someone doesn't think they are crazy. They decide to communicate with this radio show host. and through Ron, they are able to hire lawyers. Later, David and Steve's lawyer Dick and Jack arrive with Ron. With no choice, the FBI let the lawyers enter the compound. Dick tells them that the ATF claims the cult was the one who fired first. Dick also says they could file for self-defense and a jury would decide. David thinks this is the sign from God that he's been waiting for, so he finally calls Gary to tell him they are coming out. But David wants to write his short form of the 7 seals first so that people will know his message. It will take about a week for him to write. When Gary tells Mitch and Tony this, Mitch isn't happy, but Tony agrees. Then, Steve goes to the group to tell them the good news. They are relieved that it will finally be over. Later, Michelle wonders if Thibodeau will be going to jail. He admits that he might for a little while, but Michelle won't. And after he serves his time, he wants to be with Michelle. Michelle agrees to this. Afterwards, Judy types on a typewriter while David tells her what to write. Unfortunately, Judy's finger still hurts, so she asks David to slow down. But he doesn't listen. Judy has no choice but to continue typing while her bandaged finger starts to bleed. As the days pass, Tony gets anxious and wonders if David is even writing the manuscript. Gary would like Steve to get a few pages to show proof to Tony that they are writing it. However, David doesn't agree to this. At day 48, Tony and Mitch go to the Attorney General to get approval to insert tear gas into the compound. The Attorney General points out that they have gas masks. However, Mitch points out that they don't make gas masks for children. So once their eyes start watering, Mitch thinks everyone will come out. They trick the Attorney General by lying and saying David is currently abusing the children as they speak. It's been a week. Gary sees all the CS gas tanks and reminds Tony that CS gas is banned by the Geneva Convention. This would be considered a war crime. Gary needs the pages now, but Steve says David hasn't completed it yet. Tony cuts Gary's communication to Steve, and Tony wants to send Gary home. Gary tells them that the Davidians will just think their faith is being tested if they go in there with gas. Before Gary leaves, he gets angry at Tony and Mitch. He tells them that the local sheriff doesn't even carry his firearm when he talks to David Koresh. And these FBI agents go in there with tanks. The tanks approach the compound and crash into their cars and fences. David looks from the window and is confused about all of this. FBI Walter calls David and says Tony has run out of patience. David screams at them for covering evidence and protecting the ATF. The conversation doesn't end well, and by day 51, the tanks are coming at them to insert tear gas into the building. Steve receives a phone call from Walter telling them they won't enter the building and to not fire back. Only tear gas will be going into the building. Steve tells David they need to get out, but David instructs them to grab the gas masks and to cover the children's faces. Tanks crash into the building and expels tear gas. Thibodeau brings Michelle and Serenity into a cellar. He promises to come back for them. Meanwhile, Gary and his wife watch the events unfold on television. Judy finds Rachel stuck under some debris and she helps her out. Rachel and Judy head for the vault to avoid the gas. Eventually, Tony and Mitch realize that this is where they need to put the tear gas. So they do. The women and children are gathered in the vault, and once it penetrates wall, it fills the room with tear gas. Just outside, debris falls down and keeps the door from opening. David tries his best to remove the debris so he can open the door. Meanwhile, Mitch is dumbfounded as to why no one has come out of the building yet. Inside the vault, the women and children try to find another way out, but are unsuccessful. Judy and Rachel are stuck. Serenity lays down while Michelle tries to get her to wake up. Large amounts of tear gas is actually incendiary, and it starts a fire in some parts of the compound. Borlenda and David's mother watch together as they see the compound burning. Most of the men are together in the sanctuary room wearing gas masks, but explosions and fire start. Once David realizes there's no way for him to save his wives and children, he walks away. Meanwhile, Thibodeau walks into the raging fire to hopefully save Michelle and Serenity. Judy removes her gas mask and tries to put it on her baby, but it doesn't work. Thibodeau jumps out of the window, nearly escaping a fiery explosion. Thibodeau is arrested. A few others escape the compound unharmed. While the compound continues to burn, Mitch wonders where the children are. Inside, Rachel realizes Cyrus is no longer moving as she tries to drag her child outside. In order to save herself, she leaves him and shouts for help under a tunnel covered by a crushed school bus. Mitch finds her and tries to remove the school bus while Rachel suffers from inhalation. She eventually falls and Mitch is haunted by what he's done. Still inside, Steve finds David sitting on a chair. David hands Steve a gun to kill him, so he does. Steve kills himself as well. Tony, Walter and Mitch watch the compound burn down, while Gareth sobs at home. About 76 people died in the compound. 25 were children. Borlender is relieved to find out that her son was able to escape, one of only 8 people to escape the fire. On his talk show, Ron says the FBI and Davidians all claim the other side started the fire. Ron lists a bunch of other times in history when tear gas had turned into fire, killing those inside. The FBI knew this happens, and they made no plans to put out a fire. 2 weeks later, Borlender is reunited with her son Thibodeau. Much later, Thibodeau visits ground zero of the compound, left with nothing but hash and a necklace. The FBI claims they never used incendiary tear gas and claims the Davidians started the fire in a mass suicide. However, all the survivors of the fire claim there was never a plan to kill themselves. How depressing that this was a true story, even though Koresh was an evil man. This was handled very poorly by the ATF and the hostage rescue FBI team.
Subscribe for more videos like this. Turn on notifications and leave a like. It really helps the channel.